Good morning. Good morning, Peacemakers. How are we this morning? I did some peacemaking this morning. Give you a little tip, a little peacemaking that's free, a little peacemaking tip. So the boys were fussing this morning because Austin wanted to put Avery's socks on for him. Avery didn't want his socks put on. Obviously a big fight. I said, hey, you boys want a donut? Peace. Peace reigned in our household for at least 10 minutes while they ate a donut. So, if all else fails, and maybe we need to add this to the spectrum of peacemaking responses, bring donuts. Because it may not last, but for a solid 15 minutes, you'll have peace in whatever situation you have, because nobody can be sad while eating a donut.
Mediation, arbitration.
Yeah, it's a form of arbitration, mediation kind of thing. So that's a free tip. So we're moving on to lesson number 5, and hopefully you've had some time to look at that. And I think this is a really interesting topic, and thinking about idolatry and thinking about how things in our lives progress and become idols. We talk a lot about idolatry. The scripture talks a lot about idolatry, and thankfully we have, many, many years of history with the children of Israel and all their struggles with idolatry, with the paganism of the world, and sometimes that seems a bit abstract to us because we don't live in that world. But do we have our own kind of form of paganism and idolatry in our world today? I think absolutely. It doesn't take the same form as it did in the ancient days, and we don't necessarily have these giant idols made out of stone or wood, these carved images that we worship in that sense. But we worship a lot of images. We worship a lot of created things. And it's very easy for us in our society today to get caught up in those things and to be taken in by them, and to allow those things to become something that we put in the place of God, that we allow our hearts to desire more than God. We'll begin this morning with Matthew chapter 15 and verse 19. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander. Out of the heart come evil thoughts. How does something begin to become an idol in our lives? How does it begin to manifest in our lives? Well, it gets in our hearts. So all these things that become problems in our lives, the evil that we get tangled up in, and the sin that results from it, it begins in our hearts. And what does it start with? Yeah, it begins with desire. And we've talked a bit about this already, but understanding desire and understanding how we deal with desire is a really important part of understanding idolatry, understanding conflict, and understanding sin. So what is it that we desire? What are some things that we desire in our lives? Whether they're, good desires or bad desires. What do we desire?
Pleasant.
Yeah. We desire pleasure. We desire things that we enjoy, and certainly things that give us happiness. Yeah. Peace. Yeah. Hopefully everybody in here desires peace. What? Yeah. Whatever makes me happy. Absolutely. Yeah. What else?
Want things done our way. Want things done our way.
Yeah, we want our way. We want our opinion to be acknowledged. We want our wisdom to be acknowledged. That kind of thing. Absolutely. What else? What else do we desire? Yeah, acceptance. Very good. We desire for people to accept us, to like us, to want to be around us, to want to include us. Absolutely. We are social beings for the most part. And we want people to reciprocate with us that desire to be around and to talk and to share and to exchange ideas and to do things together. Absolutely. We want acceptance. Nobody wants to save money? Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great way to put it because, we say money, but money is one aspect of it. Stuff is another. I think there's kind of two things there. Some people want money because, they want that number. They want to see how big they can make that number. And some people want money because they want stuff, because they're going back to what Mickey said, pleasure, happiness, acceptance, all those things people feel like they can acquire with stuff, with having the ability to go places, to do things, and to fill the voids in their lives with pleasure. Absolutely. What else?
I'm reminded of unpleasant words. Injustice. Injustice in 1019. Peace was maybe the last line back here. But money and all things.
Yep. Yeah. So, and those are all things that we can find pleasure, enjoyment, fulfillment in, but in earthly and physical ways. But I hope we're not leaving this one out because it's not something we desire, but because we're thinking about this and things that we, have to be careful about desiring. Do we desire God? Do we desire righteousness? Do we desire a close relationship with Him? Do we desire to be pleasing to Him? Do we desire His wisdom and His care and understanding? And there's a lot to that. What do we desire? Because I think when we look at this progression of an idol and we think about the things that we desire, then we begin to understand where conflicts arise. And conflicts always start with a desire. Because whatever it is that we're in conflict about, there's something that I want, there's something that I desire, and then if somebody gets in the way, if somebody is preventing me from obtaining that, or if I perceive that somebody is preventing me from obtaining that, then that's going to be something that's going to bring about conflict. And we've talked a lot, this list we've made of things that we desire. Are some of those things inherently wrong? Some of them are. When we desire sinful things, but when we desire just to be happy, is that sinful to want to be happy? I don't think so. Can it lead to sin? Absolutely. So kind of the way we respond to that desire, how we approach those things, is going to determine whether or not it's going to begin to lead us towards sin. And so we've got to be careful, and we've got to be reflective about those things. Psalm 73, somebody, if you would turn over there and somebody read verses 25 and 26.
Whom have I in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth that I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever.
Okay, so, the basis of everything we talk about in conflict resolution and how we approach conflict, what do we always say should be the first thing? How do I honor God in this situation? Well, I think the same thing applies to our desires. If we desire God above all other things, if the desire of our heart is for Him, and as the psalmist says here, who have I in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth that I desire besides you. Can we say that about ourselves? Can we say that about our heart? It says, my flesh and my heart may fail. And I think we can insert in there, my wealth, my power, my honor, whatever you want to insert, whatever worldly thing you want to insert into that phrase may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Why is that attitude, why is that mindset so important for us? Why do we need to desire God above everything else? It's going to keep us from being so consumed by those things, right? It's going to keep us from allowing those desires that are natural and good to become sinful. And it's going to give us patience. When we get in these situations where our desires are creating conflict, how are we going to respond? Are we going to trust in God and allow Him to work in that situation and to work in our hearts to produce patience and faith, as it says in James chapter 1, and beginning there in verse 2, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. When I have this desire, how am I going to obtain it? And am I going to use my wisdom? Am I going to use my strength to get it as quick, fast, and in a hurry as I can? Or am I going to prayerfully and faithfully wait for God and wait for His wisdom and His glorification to give me what I need? Do we have that kind of faith? And do we have that kind of desire for God over earthly things to allow that to happen?
So I was thinking about the widow who gave her 2 mites. She was desiring God so much that she was able to put everything she had to do what He wanted her to do. And it tells us that, many rich people put in large sums, and it's not saying that you have to buy your desires in any way possible. But her desire was so much so that it didn't matter what she had. She was willing to give everything. At this time, it was monetary.
Yeah. And
she knew that He would cover her.
right. And that verse is reminding us of, those who have so much can give up a lot without missing it, because they still have so much. But that widow had nothing, and yet everything she had, she was willing to give to God. And we see that example over and over again. And God trying to teach us that if we give everything over to Him, He's going to take care of us. But that is so hard for us to do, both in physical terms and in, our psychological, emotional terms of allowing ourselves to just trust in Him and rather than trying to seek our own path and to seek our own wisdom. Romans chapter 8 and verse 28 says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. For those whom He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, in order that He might be the firstborn among many brothers." Are we desiring to be conformed to the image of Christ? And I think we need to pause and think about what that means. Because sometimes I think we want to focus on certain aspects of Christ and certain aspects of His life. We don't mind thinking about being loving and generous and kind and being wise, being righteous toward God. We don't like to think about being sacrificial, being an outcast, being hated and despised by the world. Are we willing to be conformed to that part of His image? Because that may be what it takes, and that is what it's going to take for us to really and truly give ourselves over in trusting in God. So we have that choice, we have that decision to make about how we're going to respond to our desires. And the desires that we have, again, they may start out as perfectly fine, perfectly normal desires, but where our heart is, where our true desire is going to determine whether or not this becomes an issue. Any thoughts or comments about that? We see a lot of desire in the Scripture, and how that progresses is when we begin to demand. As we decide something that we desire is essential. I have to have this. I must have this. I cannot be happy without this. I cannot be fulfilled without this. My life will be incomplete. However you want to phrase that. When it becomes something that we have to have, then we're going to move from desire to demand. I no longer just want this thing. It's not just something, like, hey, that'd be nice. It's something that I have to have. And we begin to move into a dangerous place. Unmet desires have a way of kind of burrowing into our heart, don't they? Kind of burrowing deeper into our thoughts, and it allows us to begin rationalizing and justifying a lot of things that we might do to obtain that thing. And it can be as simple as, well, boy, I would really like a new car. I'd really like a new car. So now let's think about all the reasons why I deserve a new car. Why not only is this something I would like to have, it's something that I need. It's something that, don't worry about. What I saw, what was the statistic the other day? The average new car payment today is something like $750 or something like that a month. So, that is a big number, but think about all the great things that would come from it, right? It's for the kids. Got to keep the kids safe. And this old beater we've got is not safe. Just different things like that. We start justifying the things that we want to have, because I wish, I would like to have, becomes I must have this in order to be happy, in order to be fulfilled. And oftentimes, what are we leaving out of that? What is the truth behind that I must?
I'm not grateful for what you do.
Okay?
You think you need something better, then you start to notice everything that's wrong with what you have versus saying that your actual needs are fulfilled.
Right. The lack of gratitude, the lack of contentment. Absolutely.
I was reading unmet desires. Sometimes we talk about unanswered prayers.
Mhm.
Pray for what they want, whether it be something doing well or something that they materially they want, and it may not be met the way you think it should be met. So we just been there.
Absolutely. You know, and again, are we going to accept God's answer, or are we going to say, well, that's not what God would want for me. This is obviously a mistake. You know, I think sometimes that's, we say we're going to listen and be patient, but then when we don't get what we were expecting, we decide, well, that was not what he meant. So our well-intentioned desires can lead to sin because of the things that we begin to rely on. And I think we talked about this earlier in the class. Genesis chapter 4 is a perfect example of this. Was Cain's desire that God be pleased with his sacrifice? Is that a sinful desire to have? Shouldn't we all be desirous that God is pleased with us? So how did that lead to him murdering his brother?
Desire what God desires.
His desire was for, we might say, his glory rather than God's, right? Because his desire didn't change his actions and attitude to be conformed to what God wanted. And rather he lashed out against his brother. It made him jealous. It made him angry toward his brother rather than looking inwardly and saying, how do I need to change to be pleasing to God?
He wanted to please God, but he wanted to do it his own way.
Right.
And Abel did it God's way. And then when he went to handle it, God said, I think we talked about it in the previous lesson we talked about this before, like God said, sin's crouching at the door, and then he could have decided to handle this, even that situation and his jealousy in God's way, but he chose, he wanted God to be pleased, but he didn't try and handle it in his way. And those things happen today, whether it's in, changing worship to fit our entertainment desires, or even in worldly things, like you said, well, God would want this for me, instead of asking God for his will to be done and then waiting to see what God wants for us. We want to think, well, I want this, so God would want this for me. Trying to conform God into honoring his sort of the other way.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Is, he was trying to mold God's desires into his desires rather than the other way around. And we are 100% guilty of that when we, as you said, when we try to conform God's desire for worship into what entertains and pleases us. When we try to conform, our families, our jobs, our hobbies, whatever it is, when we justify and we try to come up with any excuse to say that what we want is pleasing to God, rather than humbly and looking into his word and prayerfully asking for his wisdom to say, what do I need to do and to be pleasing to you? And the scripture is littered with people who did that, with people who disobeyed God. And you think about Saul, you think about all those leaders of Israel who disobeyed God and tried to justify what they were doing, who tried to, as we said, conform their desires and their ideas, and tried to conform God's will to those rather than the other way around. And so that is what this demanding leads to.
Like you said, the word earlier, what's the word? You said you start with the verb. I think that's a really dangerous word.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, every time we hear that, we should pause. I think we do, we'll find out that about 90% of the time it's not that serious.
Oh, I would take the over on that.
Yeah. So it's used a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The world uses it a lot. I don't think that there is I don't think that there's an intentional, as the world uses it, it's not an intentional disrespect to God, but it is definitely an unintentional disrespect.
I mean,
Also, I think a good example of this, where someone puts life on, in Apostle Paul, in 12, where he said, he was also Lord promise to wait until on his flesh. And God said, my grace is sufficient.
mm-hmm.
And he describes this desire that he had to get rid of that as a message of Satan, his buffeting. But he was exalted of man. So, sometimes problems are not a bad thing, and maybe God can desire that they don't go away.
Absolutely. It may be that God is trying to, as we said earlier, he's trying to produce faith and patience and righteousness in us, and trying to teach us to rely on him. But we've got to be willing to go along with that, and trusting enough to wait.
Follow along and do it.
Yeah. And again, was his life pleasant and easy and happy-go-lucky and fun times? Not much. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of walking. And it was a lot of being imprisoned, being shipwrecked, being beaten, and really not having too many friends outside of others who were servants of the Lord like he was. And so, again, thinking about that idea of being conformed to the image of Christ, we want to pick and choose which parts of that image we want to be conformed to, and that's not the way it works.
In our lady class yesterday, we were studying Ruth, and the part where she goes to Boaz at the threshing floor, and she does what she's supposed to do, and Naomi tells her to wait. And the author of our book pointed out that this Hebrew word, just wait, sob, that's a type of waiting, but it isn't like we think, well, we'll pray and then we'll wait for God to answer. And you think of that in worldly sense, like kind of like sitting in a waiting room, or there's a time frame on it. But she talks about the meaning of that word as to abide in, to trust in, and then so it isn't the impatient kind of waiting, but it's a trusting kind of waiting. And Paul kind of illustrates that when we're talking about that. He was kind of at that Psalm 73 idea, like if we're abiding in him and trusting in him, it's a different kind of waiting. It's kind of a full conforming waiting versus picking and choosing, well, I'll wait for God in this thing, to think about like the end of time or something like that. We'll wait for that, but it's something I feel like I need to have. If it's not coming, then I think it shouldn't. We're tempted to take it into our own hands and do our own way, like he did. And so we spent some time comparing and contrasting those like worldly waiting and God and worldly patience with the idea of waiting and godly patience, and how those two can influence each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You guys have had some great comments here. We're running out of time. We want to talk a little bit about understanding what an idol is. And when I say the word idol, what immediately comes to your mind? Yeah, some little image. You know, you think about that tiki in the Hawaii episodes of the Brady Bunch, right? You don't?
Yeah, go on.
You know, you think about, you know, those big statues that we find carved, and you know, we have museums filled with these things that people have worshipped over the years, and you know, a lot of them are really cool looking. You know, you see all these intricate designs and you know, this amazing work that has gone into creating these things, and they're often made out of gold and silver, and you know, they hold great value to the people who worship them. But is that the only kind of idol that there is? Well, obviously not. It's anything apart from God that we depend on for happiness, fulfillment, or security. Anything that replaces those things that we should be seeking to receive from God, those things become idols to us. They become little g gods. And so things that we set our hearts on are things that become idols to us. Luke chapter 12, and beginning there in verse 29, says, "And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you." What do we set our hearts on? Do we need food and clothing and shelter and to have our basic needs taken care of? Absolutely. We do need those things. Do we think that God doesn't know that? Do we think that the person, the being that created us, doesn't know what we need? So why would we not be willing to trust him? As it says there, all the nations of the world seek after these things. And, you know, every war that's been fought has been fought over stuff. It's been fought over resources. It's been fought over territory. It's been fought over the ability to gain and to have and to possess material things. But God knows our needs. God knows what we need in our lives. And when we trust him, and as it says there in verse 31, if we seek his kingdom, we can have faith that he's going to take care of those things. So what are we going to set our hearts on? Are we going to set them on God, or are we going to set them on worldly things and seeking after those? What motivates us? Motivation is a huge part of creating idols and gods in our lives. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, beginning there in verse 3, "But with me it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I do not even judge myself, for I am not aware of anything against myself, but I am not thereby acquitted. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore do not pronounce judgment before the Lord comes, who will bring to light the things now hidden in darkness and will disclose the purposes of the heart. Then each one will receive his commendation from God." What motivates us? Whose approval are we seeking when we desire things? Who are we trying to impress? When we desire that new vehicle, are we trying to impress our neighbors? Are we trying to impress our friends? Or are we trying to do what's right in the eyes of God? And I think our motivation comes from whose approval we're seeking. And as it says there, whose commendation we are after. And when our desire is for pleasing God, it's going to change the way that we desire things. It's going to change the way that we approach our physical desires. What masters and rules us? How would you describe that? Well, what do I mean by things that master us, things that rule us?
I mean, if it steals a bunch of your time, it's got some control over you.
Absolutely. If it's controlling our time, if it's getting in the way of things that we should be doing, if we're neglecting more important and certainly more spiritual things, then whatever that thing is an idol in our lives. Psalm 119, verse 133 says, "Keep steady my steps according to your promise, and let no iniquity get dominion over me." I like that word there, get dominion over me. When we allow worldly things, when we allow sin to have dominion over us, to begin to consume our thoughts and our time, then we're putting up idols.
Also your thinking.
Okay?
It's having control over how you are treating others and, treating them towards other people.
So if we're domineering, if we're hateful towards other people because we are just singularly minded on obtaining something, whether it be money, power, glory, whatever, we're allowing that thing, that thought, to control us, and idolatry is certainly a problem. Anything that we trust, fear, or serve, trusting, fearing, and serving are things that we should be, those are things that we should have with God. But we can certainly have them with worldly idols, with things that we allow to take a hold of our hearts, to use up our time, and to distract us from what we ought to be doing. And Isaiah 42, verse 17 says, "They are turned back and utterly put to shame who trust in carved idols, who say to metal images, 'You are our gods.'" We trust in worldly created things. And I think that's the thing we have to remember, is we have a choice. Are we going to trust in created things, or are we going to trust in the Creator? And when we put it in that context, the choice gets real clear. Because it makes no sense to trust in created things when we have the option to trust in the Creator, who possesses and controls all of those things. But we don't think about that enough, right? We don't think about that context nearly enough to understand it and to allow that to change our hearts. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 21, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." I think one of the biggest lies that Satan has ever told us is we can have it all, right? We can have it all. We can have the world, and we can have God. God has reminded us over and over again that he is a jealous God, and that he demands our full attention, our full heart, our full desire should be for him. Because if we're going to talk about that word deserve, he deserves it. We talk about all the things that we deserve, but God deserves our full time and attention. I'll leave you with this quote here from Martin Luther: "To whatever we look for any good thing, and for refuge in every need, that is what is meant by God. To have a God is nothing else than to trust and believe," type too fast there, "him from the heart, to whatever you give your heart and entrust your being. That, I say, is really your God." Thank you guys for your time and attention. Good comments this morning. We'll pick up with the rest of this lesson on Wednesday.